Now, this last question that you've hopefully thought about before you just clicked on the next video, what does this graph show us? And this is what I wanted to get at. Even though there's no relation as far as statistics is concerned. So when I was saying back several pages ago that there's no correlation, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing going on. When I'm speaking in these terms, I'm talking about something very clinical, if you will, very statistical, namely that you don't see a discernible linear or curved pattern, right? We're particularly interested in seeing lines and curves like these, okay? But even though you see kind of a mess, it doesn't mean that this graph isn't showing us a whole lot about HIV in the world, for example. And so I wrote up what it's showing me. And you could give speeches on this. I mean, and matter of fact, some people have given speeches on that exact same graph. If you look up Hans Rosling, the guy that invented Gapminder, he's got a speech precisely about AIDS. He has a couple of them about HIV and AIDS. But you can see that these blue countries are not only the largest dots in general, right? Although India is pretty large, right? So they're not only the largest dots, largest numbers of people living with HIV, but they also, right, largest dots means largest number of people, but they also have the highest percentages of their population. India has a quite a big number as well, but India has a huge population. So even though it's 2.4 million people living with HIV in India, that's only 0.3% of the population for India because India is such a big country. Whereas these dots, look at them, they're much higher than the rest of them. Most countries are down here, slumming around on the point, well, they're all pretty much lower than 1% of their population. But all these countries, 3.6% of their population, 5.6, 11% of the population, 14% of the population, 24%, one in every 4 adults in Lesotho has HIV. All right? That's huge numbers. Okay? So huge numbers in terms of percents. And I said that they have the highest dots, as in their dots are not only the largest, that's how many people, but they're also highest up on the graph in this vertical scale. So that means the largest percentages. It's also interesting to note that for the most part, with the exception of South Africa, Botswana, and so on, these countries all over here are all in the low end of GDP, right? These are poor countries. Nigeria has an average income of $2,159 per person per year. Can you imagine living in a country where on average you would make $2,000 in the whole year? That's how poor these countries are. Right? Liberia is even lower, only $475 in the whole year per person on average. All right. So it's interesting to note these are very poor countries, but there are other poor countries as well. Right? Haiti is extremely poor. That's the yellow dot right there. Nepal and so on. These are poor countries, but they're not as high in terms of percentages. So there's obviously something else going on rather than just income, right? And if you know a little bit about HIV, you know that the sub-Saharan African strain is actually a different strain of HIV than in many of the other countries and so on. And there's also problems with education, there's problems with funding, there's problems with, there's all sorts of problems. All right, now that we've finished looking at that, I hope you enjoyed your first foray into Gapminder. It won't be your last, I'm sorry. That's just how it's going to be. So the most important type of correlation for our course is linear. We're really interested in lines. In particular, we want to know direction. Is it positive or negative, which we ran into before? And we also kind of want to know, is it a perfect correlation? Is it a strong, moderate, or weak correlation? So we're going to look at these, and you're going to judge at which ones of these are strong, which ones of these are weak. Are any of them perfect? Yes, a couple of them are. All right, so pause me for a second and go fill them out. And I'll do it too. I'll pause you and go fill them out. All right, the first two you should have been able to discern are these two. This one's a perfect negative relation. The ducks are all in a row. And this one's perfect positive. All right, I'll go fill out some more. Okay, here are the rest of them. This one's pretty weak. You can see it's negative, but it's not very good. Right? The points are kind of all over the place. This one's actually quite strong for a negative. This one's very strong positive. This one's moderate, maybe strong, moderate or strong. I would probably take either, which leads us to our next issue with this. But it's a positive relationship for sure.